POCO has just brought these two phones out. So it is the X4 Pro 5G and the M4 Pro. Now in this in-depth comparison review, I'm going to go over them in detail. We'll take a look at the differences between the Helio G96 and the Snapdragon 695. We have a 120Hz screen versus 90Hz screen. Both of them have 5,000 mAh batteries. And the differences between them aren't quite as clear-cut as it would seem when you look at the spec sheet. No, the cheaper phone is actually better than the more expensive phone at a few things, as you'll find out in this comparison. Included in the box with both of them, you get our USB cables, which is USB Type A to Type C, 2 chargers, but different wattage here. So with the more expensive phone, the X4 Pro 5G, it is 67 watts, fully charges the 5,000 mAh battery in just 44 minutes, not bad at all. And then 33 watts here with the POCO M4 Pro, also a 5,000 mAh battery, and it takes 70 minutes to charge it. So along with the power adapter and the cable, both of them you get one of these in each of them, which is a TPU case. So cut out for the camera, there's a raised edge to stop it from getting scratched, and the cutout there for the power button, fingerprint reader, and there's even a cover for the Type-C port to stop dust getting in. Now, both of these phones here have an IP53 splash resistance. The X4 Pro 5G is slightly larger, so it's a 6.67-inch screen here, this one, so it gives us a larger phone, as you can see, side by side, but not by much, because it's 6.43 inches, the M4 Pro. Now, the chipset's big difference. We've got a Snapdragon 695 with 5G support versus the Helio from MediaTek G96. Now, both of my review units here, they both have 6 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabytes of storage. Camera modules, similar there, as you can see. The POCO M4 Pro that I'm holding right now has a 64 megapixel main camera, ultra-wide's 8 megapixels, and then a macro 2 megapixel. The exact same two cameras, those bottom ones there, on the X4 Pro. So the backing material here is quite nice, the finish to it, but shiny. It doesn't look quite as good as the X4 Pro, which I'll show you now, but it does have curved edges. Now, the weight of this phone is 180 grams versus the slightly heavier 205 now with the POCO X4 Pro. So that's a 108 megapixel sensor there, and then those 8 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel. The AI branding, I wish they just didn't even put that there. And then we've got our flash. I guess they're trying to make it look a little bit more symmetrical there. So you have this, what almost looks like spotlight effect, the shining lines really along here, which look a little bit nicer too. At certain angles in the light, the X4 Pro do like. Now, it's a flat back and it's a square frame on it, okay, around the outside. So both of them have plastic frames. Now, the weight of this, as mentioned, is 205, but what about the thickness? It is 8.1 versus about 8.09, so they're almost identical, but the cameras do stick out an additional 2-3 millimeters. So on the side here, we've both got capacitive, always on fingerprint readers, so I'll try the M4 Pro first. You can see that's quick. I'll do it again. Not too bad. And we'll try now the X4 Pro fingerprint reader. That one seemed actually even slower. There we go. If you haven't used it for a while, it sometimes can be a little slow there. So both of them aren't really that quick. Then we've got the volume up and down buttons on both of them here are made out of plastic. So plastic frame. Then on our side here on the left, you can see a SIM tray tool with the M4 Pro. Now, it does take 2 nano SIMs and a micro SD card, so you can run all 3 at the same time. Whereas with the X4 Pro, you have to give up on one of those nano SIMs if you want to run a micro SD card. So you can insert a nano SIM here, nano SIM there, as you can see on that side, but you cannot run all 3 like you can with the M4 Pro. The SIM tray is located on the bottom of the X4 Pro. So we've got our Type-C ports, microphones, loudspeakers here. And then when you look at the top of both of the devices, there is a lot of good news here. We've got secondary loudspeakers. Later on, I'll give you a sample of both of them, and we'll compare them. IR transmitters, secondary microphone, so noise cancelling with voice calls on both of them. I've placed voice calls on both. Both sound about the same to my ears. 3.5mm headphone jacks with hardware FM radio support. You just need to plug in a headset. Now, both of them do have very good output from them. They sound loud. It could be a little bit louder, actually, but they're clean. They're clear, which is great. And I think that to my ears, the X4 Pro does sound slightly better. Then our front-facing cameras. So they are both 16 megapixels, but for some reason, we do have a smaller cutout on the X4 Pro versus the M4 Pro. They do have these silver rings around the outside of them, which I wish that POCO would not do. So when you turn the screen off, those front-facing cameras, they stand out way more than they really should. Onto our displays and the UI. So we do have 90 Hz versus 120 Hz. This one feels a lot faster. So 360 Hz touch sampling rate versus 180, also lagging behind. Gorilla Glass 3 versus Gorilla Glass 5. Now, in the settings here on both of them for the displays, you can see we do have options for the refresh rate. So you've got 90 and 60, and here you've got 120 and 60. I really think they should put 90 Hz on this model too. I hope they can change that with the firmware. Now, screen brightness, both of them 700 nits. You do have Gorilla Glass 3 on that, as mentioned before, and Gorilla Glass 5, so it could give a bit of a difference. Maybe if you drop them, that this might hold up a little bit better to such impacts. Maybe not, it all depends on, of course, how it falls. So they're good screens, they're bright screens, they're Full HD+, and I don't think anyone's going to have any issues with them. It's great to see AMOLED screens finally dominating here and no more IPS really with these kind of models. So the touch gestures, just bring those up again here. They're working fine on both of them. I do notice maybe a slight edge in response with this particular model here, and we'll get into just a few things too that I want to show you. With the UI, it's MIUI 13, okay, for POCO, and they're both running Android 11. But when you get them both, you're going to see this. You are going to see a bit of bloatware, quite a bit of bloatware, in fact, because look at it all. There's a huge amount of apps that you will need to uninstall. So I counted almost 3 gigabytes of garbage on both of them that I had to remove. Now, I know some people might like some of these apps, but I didn't count Netflix as bloatware. I did count these games, LinkedIn, and all sorts of other things. Okay, so a bit of bloatware on there. So that's what they are on now. The latest patches have come through. There's just a recent patch now for this one again. So it's had 2 firmware updates. This has had nothing so far at the time of me recording this video. So when you install applications, advertisements will pop up, and they're still doing this. I just think this is a big no, okay? You pay for the phone. Why do they have to keep making money off us through advertising? They shouldn't be doing that at all. So both of them have similar storage speeds. There's really not much in it, but when you look at the random reads and writes, the cheaper model here with the MediaTek is in fact faster. Random writes and reads, okay? You see that difference? It's quite a bit there. So not really that much in it when you look at the sequentials, okay? Very similar, but that does have the faster storage there. Now the Antutu scores show us that, wow, there's quite a bit of a separation there. Well, not really. 80,000 points is not that much. So GPU looking a bit of a difference around there. CPU score not too much. But really, when you use them, aside from the benchmarks, they feel both very similar, and both of them do lag in the UI at times. Animation stutter definitely present on both. The difference with wildlife here, not that much. You can see barely anything. And then our Geekbench 5 score. So that's where there is quite a bit of a difference with the single core score and multi here between the G97 versus the Snapdragon 695. And here with GPS, because there's no limitation on the accuracy with the MediaTek chipset, it can get a better accuracy. But I did notice that normally the Qualcomm chipset has a slightly better average signal strength for GPS. Both have hardware compasses, and for some reason both of them were pointing in a slightly different direction, even though I was aiming them really in the same place. So that was interesting. So this is where, again, the cheaper model is better. Very strange. Widevine level 1 cert here. So Netflix in Full HD, Netflix in standard definition, because it's only got a level 3 cert. Why? But this will be fixed. I'm certain in a firmware update, POCO will be fixing that. Wireless performance. Again, we have another point here to the cheaper phone. The M4 Pro has much better wireless performance thanks to that MediaTek chipset. The Qualcomm one lagging behind. In the last point downstairs, the speeds were good, but nowhere near as fast as this. So a big difference there. And you notice it too when you install and download applications. The whole process was faster on the M4 Pro. Okay, both of them get the Safetynet status pass. Good, as you'd expect. Both of them have NFC. So yes, banking apps, they're going to be working on this for all of that. I did run the stress test here of wildlife, and you can see that they barely throttle. These chips don't get hot enough to generate enough heat to throttle themselves, really. So you're only losing in performance 0.9% versus 0.6%. Okay, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Battery life, so close. Wow, similar chipsets in performance, same battery capacity, 5,000 milliamp hours, and look at that. Barely any difference at all. So this is a fixed benchmark, 20 nits each, and that's it. Real world use, about 10 hours on both of these. And that is on the faster refresh rate, 9 to 10 hours. So very good battery life. These phones are champions when it comes to the battery because, well, they're low-powered chipsets with AMOLED screens. It helps. Audio quality now. So both of them, I do like the sounds of the 3.5mm out. They've both got dual loudspeakers. So what I will do is play a clip and I'll let you know which one I think sounds the best. But I wanted to point out here with the scrolling, you don't see that much of a difference, to be honest, between 90 Hertz and 120. It's almost like, is it just running on both of these at 60? It is smooth, but sometimes I feel it feels a bit smoother here on the MediaTek chipset versus that Snapdragon 695, which shouldn't actually be the case, right? Because that one in the benchmarks is a little bit faster, but it could be down to the ROM optimization. So what I do now is play a track on both of them at 100% volume, and we'll compare which one sounds the best. So the POCO X4 Pro won that one. It's richer, the speakers, and it's just a little bit more bass. This one tends to sound a little flat there when it comes to the bass, and maybe not quite as loud either, the M4 Pro. So a clear win there for the X4 Pro for loudspeakers. Now onto our gaming performance here with PUBG. So on both of them, the setting that we can use here for frame rate is Ultra. That's the best we get on smooth. If you can run it on balanced as well if you want, but I think with this hardware, I want to run all of it on smooth. So Ultra and Ultra, that's capped at 45 frames per second with this game. So I'll test out gameplay now. We'll take a look. Is there a big difference between them with the frame rate? Okay, so if you do swipe from the top left-hand corner, you can see Game Turbo. It states the frame rate, so 41 frames per second. This is the M4 Pro versus 42, sorry, on the X4 Pro. Now, I have noticed with the gameplay that basically they are exactly the same. The frame rate we're getting, they both seem to always be around 40 frames per second. So get him just to run ahead. Obviously, it's a little bit hard to play this game simultaneously on two different phones. So just swipe here again. You can see 41 frames per second and then 41 frames per second. And I just noticed this throughout the time that I've been playing games, playing PUBG here, that the frame rate is exactly the same on both. The performance really seems the same. So if your decision is based on getting the best gaming performance, you can't really go wrong with both of these, at least in a game like PUBG here, with the frame rates kept at 45, but it can't actually quite get to the 45, this hardware, even on the balanced option. So I just stop running here on both of them. Okay, and we'll look down the scopes and a quick little move around. So that is now 41 frames per second. And let's have a look here. That is 41 frames per second. Now, both of them, because they're low-end hardware, they don't actually get that hot at all. They get a little warm, but no thermal throttling is going to happen. They don't throttle down the performance, so that's good. It seems the cooling on them is fine here. So equal performance on both of these POCO phones. Now over to our cameras here. So front-facing cameras, vlog footage, 1080p maximum right here. And the frame rate on both of them is looking pretty steady, around 30 frames per second. It does have electronic image stabilization. As you can see as I walk ahead, it's looking quite steady. Now if I start to jog, it moves around a little bit more as expected. Now you notice that my face here is a little bit overexposed on both of them. Let's have a look at the rear cameras now for video performance. Now the rear cameras, so 108 megapixel on one and then 64 megapixels, both of them do have electronic image stabilization as I walk ahead. But which one looks the steadiest? Is it the X4 Pro 5G or the M4 Pro? Let me know in the comments which one you think looks the best here. And it's 1080p maximum, so none of them does support 4K, unfortunately. Now as I pan around, will there be a few more judders on one of these versus the other? And now we'll take a look at the ultra-wide cameras. Finally, the ultra-wide cameras, so they only, both of them, support 1080p 30 frames per second, just like the main camera. The quality of these two ultra-wides looks nowhere near as good as what we have from the main camera, and looks a little bit washed out, to be honest, on both of them with that 8 megapixel sensor that we have. So we'll do another pan test very, very slowly. I can see a bit of judder definitely coming through on one of them. So let me know in the comments which one you think looks the best with our video performance. Some very interesting findings there, that the cheaper phone had better wireless performance, better storage speeds, and they both game pretty much exactly the same. So in benchmarks like Antutu, sure, the Snapdragon 695 is better, but in the real world when you're gaming, you just don't really see a difference. I might have seen maybe on average 1 frame per second more. So if your decision is a phone that you're going to be gaming on and you're basing it on the performance, for PUBG, for example, like I tested, I wouldn't worry about it. Go for either one, whatever is going to fit your budget there, of course. Now, the 108 megapixel camera didn't actually take always the best photo. It was a bit of a surprise. The 64 megapixel one did show us that more always isn't better. Perhaps the ISP, the image signal processor, for the Snapdragon was struggling a little bit with those extra megapixels. It could have been, and that's why it resulted in, well, the video being a little bit more choppier at times, some of those photos not being quite as good. So they did kind of trade blows there when it came to the camera performance that I showed you. And sadly, both of them just support 1080p 30 frames per second. And very odd to see that the X4 Pro 5G doesn't have a Widevine level 1 cert. So Netflix is in standard definition, whereas with the M4 Pro, it's in full HD. So both have very good screens. If you want the best screen, then you do go for the X4 Pro 5G. The UI performance on both of them at times can be laggy. The animations can be a little bit choppy. So clearly to me, optimization is needed on both. Both of them have very good battery life. So if you just take it easy with them, that you're not gaming the whole time, that is, just social media, for example, then you should be able to get around 9 hours of screen on time with both of these, perhaps 9.5, a little tiny bit more, half an hour more on the X4 Pro 5G. So there we go, now you know, thanks to this comparison here, the differences between them. And this is basically my review too of both of these phones here. Thanks a lot for watching. If you did like this video and you want to see more comparisons and other tech videos, then do subscribe for more. And I hope to see you back in the channel with the next video.